So, Alan, we sent this to you. I just want to check to make sure you had a chance to read it and you're in agreement with having this interview.
Yes, I am, Chris. I'm good with it.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I'll start. Okay, I'm Chris Crowley. I'm with or was with the University of British Columbia. I'm recently retired as well. Um,
Yay.
so I was the manager of the distance learning group or learning design group at the University of British Columbia, and I was there for over 35 years. So I'm starting something new. But this project is actually kind of carrying on, keeping me in touch with folks like Diane and Cindy and Alan, and meeting new people. So this has been really good.
Good.
Okay, how about I go next? I'm Cindy Ives. I am recently retired, full professor from Athabasca University. My initial introduction to AMTEC was in the very early 1980s when I worked for the National Film Board of Canada in Saskatoon. And then later in the mid to late 90s at Laurentian University. And then later than that as a PhD student at Concordia University, where there were a number of AMTEC originals. And then in the mid 2000s, again, as I said, at Athabasca University, where I have maintained my involvement with AMTEC through the AMTEC Trust membership and as also president and past president of the Canadian Network for Innovation in Education. And Diane.
Hi, Alan. My name is Diane James. I am currently a faculty member and coordinator with the Center for Learning and Engagement at Thompson Rivers University. I'm the only one that isn't retired, but it's on the horizon at some point. And it's a thrill to have you here because I remember your name a lot when I was studying with Mary Kennedy in my first master's degree. So I'm been around AMTEC for a long time. Mary introduced me to AMTEC as a student, and then I moved into some leadership roles with CNIE, and later on, and with CADE first, and then CNIE later on, and also served for a brief time with the AMTEC Trust. So it's been a real pleasure to work with Chris and Cindy on this history project. So looking forward to chatting with you today. So the one thing that I'm going to do before we get started and before I spotlight you is just to give a little tiny brief overview of the history project so that you have an idea as to what we've been up to. And also it also gives the folks that are watching, if they don't watch some of the other videos first, it lets them sort of have an idea as to what we were up to. So the original idea was that we were coming up on a major history anniversary that was happening with AMTEC. And myself and Cindy and Chris had been chatting about how do we collect and preserve the history of educational technology in Canada? How do we make the history of AMTEC more accessible? And how would we potentially store in a central location some of the artifacts that still exist in various people's offices and in some cases basements of all of the AMTEC memorabilia that existed over time. So we started creating this idea of showcasing AMTEC, and it resulted in a publication last year, or was it earlier this year? Time is flying. With Tech Trends, which celebrated the 100th anniversary of AECT, and that allowed us to celebrate the 50th anniversary of AMTEC. So it gave us an opportunity to really speak to all of the historical pieces that brought us to AMTEC in the early 1970s. So we started in May of 2022 to start to call to past members such as yourself to try and figure out where materials were and to begin to digitize the collection. We started AMTEC interviews, and we saw ourselves sort of being finalized somewhere around March of 2023. What we discovered was that we still had a very rich history to explore. So this is our latest, but not hopefully our last interview with our with AMTEC colleagues. And that's all I'm going to say on that. I'm going to spotlight you, so you are part of. Now, let me just make sure I do this properly. There we go. All right. And Cindy, I don't know if you wanted to start off the questions.
Well, sure. Alan, we're wondering if you could give us just a little bit of background about yourself and your relationship with educational technology, just in general terms, and then we've got a series of questions specific to answer.
I appreciate that. French Irish in me can be long-winded, so cut me off if you've heard enough of an answer. I got into teaching in the early 70s after spending a bit of time in radio and television. I give that as a prologue because the eventual role I played was a result of that experience. I started off as a French second language teacher in elementary. And then I got interested in media at the time. I had connections at Sony when they had something called the Traveling Band Television Studio. They came up to Sault Ste. Marie where I worked for a weekend. Over the course of that weekend, I discovered that the media coordinator at the other school board at the time was moving on. And she wanted me to take over her job. She was a nun. I didn't want to be a nun. But anyway, I applied, got the job, and that began my media and education career. Discovered quickly that there are not many of us in those roles at that time. You were lucky if you had one per institution, be it college, university, K-12. My first conference was in St. Catharines. I'm going to say 77-ish or what have you. But I met some tremendous colleagues from all levels. In particular, June Landsberg stands out. She's the one about early 90s that coerced, controlled, or what have you. She wanted me to run for the board, which I did. Nobody knew anybody from Sault Ste. Marie, so I didn't win the posting, but the fellow who did couldn't complete his term. Therefore, I don't know if June was president at the time. I could look it up. She says he's got a year to go. We want you to be the director. Spent a year as director, 3 years as secretary-treasurer, then 3 more years as AMTEC president-elect, president, and past president. I hung around until 2021 when I retired. I retired because my last 2 kids decided they didn't want dad to pay for their university. They won scholarships, et cetera, and that was burned after 32 years. I worked K-12. Now, if you take a look at the AMTEC directories, there's a number of those around. You may have one in your file. This is in 93. This one is 92. Please note the color. You mentioned memorabilia. Here's something very rare.
Oh,
Wow.
Yes.
I don't know how many AMTEC mugs are kicking around. This is almost all I have left of what I had. Now, somewhere during my tenure, this same issue that you folks are dealing with came up. My daughter was going to school in Ottawa at the time. Anyway, long story short, I had a contact in Ottawa, and we basically just shipped, 20 boxes to national archives. And to this day, that remains.
Yep.
Derek was responsible after I left. And then, of course, once you retire, after a while, you lose touch. The only other thing we have that you probably have, by last year, I have a membership list from 2001. Some general comments. If you take a look at the AMTEC handbook from 93 and look at the structure of the board, it's fascinating to see how many people came out of the K-12 sector. I'd like to reference that. Rosman was secretary.
Alan,
Sorry,
we lost your voice.
Yes, sorry, we're losing your voice.
tried again.
Yeah.
Lillian Garefoot was from Nanaimo. Bob Christie, Calgary. Dan Malone, Kevin the Catholic Schools. Danielle Bertusky was University of Saskatchewan.
Mhm.
Then there's a bunch of 7 or 8 chair people. Fully half or more of those people that served in leadership roles came out of the K-12 sector, because we were the only purveyors, if you wish, of tech at the time in the school systems. We looked at colleges and universities for help, guidance, information. When I got on the board, and then the conference was a major exchange of information, leadership at the time wanted K-12 presenters. So people like Ron Eyre out of Guelph, Dave Beeman out of Exeter, Allen LeBlanc out of Nova Scotia, Lavoie out of BEI, Godfreyson out of Nanaimo. We all made an effort to do presentations of what we were doing in K-12 during AMTEC conferences. Technologically, we made contact with people like Carlson, the late Bruce McLean, Al Lehman at Coniston, and other people that worked at community colleges where we needed help for the infrastructure, if you wish. Then we roped in the Mary Kennedys of the world, because we were very much flying on the seat of our pants as far as philosophy and introduction was. Well, there were 2 big issues that we ran up to in K-12, and it was similar across the country. The first issue was that educational leadership at that time was rear view looking. They had no clue what ed tech was, or media, or learning technology. So anytime we wanted to implement something, it was an uphill battle. Didn't matter if it was staff, policy, plan, operating procedures, budget especially. Became very difficult. Along came CADE, along came the computer people. Everybody protected their turf. There was lots of merger discussions during my tenure in the late 90s. And nothing happened until after I left. So that's, in a nutshell, is basically where my experience comes from. And some of the people I dealt with. The benefits for me was, if I had a problem in Sault Ste. Marie with my 37 schools, I could call Ron Eyre in Guelph or John Godfreyson out here and say, hey, you know what have you guys done with video? Or what are you doing with 16 mil film? And what about your provincial television networks? TV Ontario is still going. We were fortunate. Most of the other provinces, unfortunately, have lost their learning centers, or they've morphed into something else. The one objection I have, if you say educational technology today, the masses, if you wish, will assume that's computers and only computers. I beg to differ from what I see and hear from the grandkids. They're using whiteboards and projectors, but the brand name of the car has disappeared, if you wish, and the model has disappeared, but the effect and how you use it academically is still there. So that's my erudite statement for the day.
Well,
Yeah,
and
so that's where I'm at.
your observations are well founded, because you're absolutely right. I think there's in a lot of people's minds, educational technology has narrowed, but in actual fact, if you go out into the community and into the society, you've discovered that it's actually not as narrow as it might be put forward.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
ahead.
No, go ahead.
You guys ask a question.
So I get, so in your presidency with AMTEC, Can you speak to sort of some of the key issues that you faced as the president? Because you would have gone as a director and then as a secretary treasurer, so you had lots of experience sort of coming into the presidential role. What kinds of what were the key issues, I suppose, at the time?
Well, operationally, the big one was always budget. There was nobody funding us except the conferences and membership fees. And that was always a battle. Most conferences lost a little bit of money. Some made money. But in my 3 years as president, VP, or whatever, I recall, there was only 1 year when we did need conference money to run the operation. Membership fees took care of it. So it was very, very difficult that way. Where there was money occasionally, in the form of a grant or scholarship, that tended to go to students. For example, you're probably all familiar with the Commonwealth Relations Trust, and AMTEC members, primarily secondary, benefited greatly from that. I know layman's went, and the guy from Edmonton. Sorry. So there was money out there, but not for K-12. So going back to AMTEC, it was operational cost.
Yeah.
I never had trouble getting people to come to work for us or to take on projects or to do presentations because we were all in survival mode. When Bruce McLean retired, for example, we had a little do out in Victoria that I attended, and her name slips by me, but his right-hand lady assistant brought his master's thesis. And we were flipping through it, and I read through it that night when he was at, where was he? I forget the college. Anyways, in Victoria. Not Victoria, Vancouver. When Bruce was trying to get his media department going, as I read through his master's thesis, I realized that he was suffering from the same issues we had in school districts. Lack of space, lack of budget, lack of staff, lack of equipment. So I think we sort of all commiserated in what worked and didn't work. University level was a little different in that for some reason they were better able to access funding and or government funding and or grants from the Sony corporations and Panasonic of the world seemed to want to fund those guys rather than the elementary panel. So that's sort of what I experienced running through AMTEC. My current wife does conference planning and administration. She works in Alberta here with some groups that she's been with for a number of years. The geopolitics, if you wish, of working with volunteer groups are absolutely identical everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have board issues, you have personality issues, you have funding issues. I'm proud to say she does a hell of a job at what she does. But I look back at her experience the last dozen years I've been out here, and it so reminds me of my time with AMTEC. We managed to hang on, though, to something I think fairly unique in the sense that we were a national organization. We tried to balance our efforts from the biggest province to the smallest. I mean, with all due respect, who has a conference in rural Nova Scotia? We did. One of the best ones ever. We come to discover that the big city conferences were nowhere near as fun as the smaller ones. St. Catharines, Guelph, and whatnot. The conference committees were usually local people. Hopefully, if there was a college and a university, the three got together. But unlike a couple of groups Robin works with, they can afford to hire conference planners and organizers doing memberships and registration and all that. It was all done by volunteer, every last stick of it. The conference planners, unlike the Ron Ayers of the world, if you had good industry connections, we had good media support. Some didn't, and it was tough to even get equipment. And I think that was the hardest part. The annual run of an AMTEC would be basically in the fall, you're gearing up for the following June's convention. Winter meeting somewhere in Canada was usually at the site of the upcoming conference. And then the rest was basically maintenance of communications between CADE and was it called or the computer people, I forget, and liaison, and to try to drum up interest in educational technology on a broader scale. Now, people like Mary Kennedy and Mary Brown out of Newfoundland, as an example, they were instructing or teaching people the master's program, granted. But given it was Newfoundland, it was only the one university or post-secondary. And most of their clients, if you wish, were K-12 teachers. So they were very instrumental in spreading the word and getting the teacher, the instructor that was in front of the students, to think technologically, if you wish. And Rick Schweer in Saskatoon, who I ended up going out and doing some workshops for, it was for teacher groups at the time. So we had that kind of liaison, and if you want to wish, cross organizations or cross level support. And I enjoyed that because I was learning at the same time. We were very much in the vanguard of videotape and some audio stuff that was new and digital. When computers came along, we were the designated people to do computers because people said, oh, well, it's technology, you guys do it. Totally illiterate, totally unqualified. Muddled through it until, in my case, they actually appointed somebody else to be the computer guy. And most school districts ended up going with a computer guy. Not thinking of overlapping, but in Ontario in particular, the computer organization got baked very fast, and we're in a very much controlling mood, and only computers were technology. And so I think that sort of sidelined it a bit, what AMTEC was trying to do. Now, CADE's a different story yet. Tried to work with CADE a bit. I actually did some distance ed for Contact North, by the way. Anybody familiar with Contact North out of Rich?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So they drag somebody like me on board to do work with people in the far north, for example, in teacher ed courses. I also taught all 3 levels of media specialists for the Ministry of Education in Ontario by the Faculty of Ed at Nipissing, primarily through Bob Barnett at the time, who's still around, by the way. Anyway, so that's a summary of basically where I've been, what I've done. And if there's any particular area you want me to sort of pontificate on, fire away.
So, Alan, you've covered a lot of territory.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. And I find it interesting. You talk about K-12, you talk about coast to coast, the conferences that were in the small towns. And I do remember going to some of those conferences and was always amazed at what these small towns or these small communities, smaller communities were doing with technology. It was always kind of really surprising. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. But one thing I've always felt about AMTEC, it was deep in the sense that it addressed K-12, addressed college, university, and private enterprise institutions, as well as broad. And it was kind of a home across Canada for I think a lot of people who were a little bit on their own or being, like, as you said earlier, one person inside an institution. So AMTEC was kind of a home for them to share and to know people and to make contacts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also gave us a bit of a window via the mainstream media, because whenever any new, quote, educational tech thing came along, So your administrators didn't know what these people wanted, so they'd send you down to the media center, the resource center. So we got exposure that way.
So that leads me to ask sort of this question, which is, what made AMTEC important to educational technology in Canada? I mean, you've touched on, as Chris mentioned, the smaller conferences and the sort of coast to coast, but what really made AMTEC important in your mind?
Because as educators at all levels, we recognize that the way teaching was going was changing slowly but fast at the same time. The kids were coming home from their social events. They had Game Boys, they had cassette players, they had boom boxes, they had CD players. I remember at a conference, I believe it was Saskatoon, Regina, Pioneer had a 12-inch laser disc. And everybody was going, wow, look at that. The cars going over the cliff. You could freeze a single frame at 100 miles an hour. Bang, it would stop. Oh, that's a rubber guardrail they use in the movie. Those kind of teaching moments you couldn't do on a film at the time, or you couldn't do out of a book. Some of us who were somewhat familiar with production thought, what a great way to teach various concepts in photography, audio, visual. You go through the nomenclature of what the field was. It started off as, I think, audio, visual. Then it went to learning resources, etc. Then it went to learning technology and so forth. So that evolution was driven. That terminology was driven by society, primarily the kids that were coming home with what the companies, the Sonys and Panasonics and ICOMs of the world were selling you. And DVD players and cassette player and the Walkman, it was a pivotal moment. The music. I remember when I got video and I was putting on this 3-day weekend production workshop. And we had other teachers who didn't participate would come up to us and say, hey, I want to make a 10-minute video of my class doing whatever. My first question was, where's your script? Got a storyboard. Have you got 10 to 100 hours? And I go, oh, no, I just want to do 10 minutes. I said, it'll take you that much. Oh, so people didn't realize it's like today driving your car. You get in your car, you turn the key and it goes. There's no way you're going to fix it like you did 40 years ago. The technology did the same thing with teachers. It intrigued them, but it also made them very nervous about, oh my God, the kids are coming here. And now we laugh. It's something wrong with your computer. I have grandkids, and I'll say Sophie or Ethan, Grandpa's stuck here. Oh, as soon as somebody with a computer says to me, all you have to do is, I go, hang on, you fix it, then I'll use it. So there's a Luddite with computers for you. I mean, it's great. And then I experienced the same thing, though, in what I would call softer media, like film and video. I started off in television as a 16-year-old with 2-inch quad tape in a basement studio. I went through 1-inch. I went through half-inch. I went through a U-matic 3/4-inch cassette. I went through, what else was there? There was Beta. There was a Sony format. I had a whole resource center with 8mm video. DVD came along after Pioneers. They went from 12 inches. I have a 3-inch laser disc from about 1980 that's got Bill Black's combo music on it that somebody produced. So I went from that. I used to use it in workshops and show people. Went from this to this. Those of us who were in this field if you look at our prior experience, for the most part, up till I'd say the first 20 years of AMTEC or so, we were either technologically keen or had some other type of technical experience. I was lucky. I spent 5 years in radio and TV. So I never met a microphone I didn't like, of course, or a camera I wouldn't smile at. But it's, you bring that to teaching, you can animate your students. I found that when I taught teachers, I also did some on-site courses for Nipissing. I taught in Timmins for 2 summers. Wow, that was exciting. Teach in the morning, bike in the afternoon. And I did courses down in Pine River along the North Shore for those school districts, all through Nipissing. And as much as the students in the remote parts were good, the ones that showed up in class, I was sort of pleasant to find out that my media 1, 2, and 3 teachers that came in as students, they were just like my grade 8 or grade 12 students in regular school. It was kind of neat because they had no prior knowledge, they had no foundation, but they were curious, keen to learn, loved hands-on. And of course, if you're a teacher, that's what you want to do, right? Is to motivate them. So we would use the technology and even the overhead projector. I had a 3-hour workshop using the overhead projector. And believe it or not, we never wrote on it once. Never wrote on it. Well, years later, I'd have teachers coming back and say, hey, do you remember that thing with food coloring? Remember that thing with acetates? Remember that thing with slides or film? Remember that thing with the mechanic? You name the subject, we used the overhead to demonstrate. So I think what we did as AMTECers, we shared those at workshops or at the conferences, and we spread the word. And that, I think, is some of my fondest memories of what I had to do at AMTEC. Hated the institutions I worked for, with, hated the politics. Absolutely loved the work I did. And I think I'm still in touch with Carlson, Layman's occasionally, and Bob Clark and Kamloops, who retired, but retired a year late. I have to tell the Bob Clark story. He was supposed to retire, wanted a new truck. His wife says, you want a new truck, work 1 more year. So he did. Bought his new truck. So, shut up, Al. That's where it came from. That's where it came from. When I heard about this project, I thought it could add something to your K-12 perspective, but more importantly, to the contributions of those of us that serve on the boards, where they mainly came from, what their contributions were. I mean, the people that went off, for example, to Commonwealth Relations, did us a great favor because people saw that, and it sort of validated the work we did. I could go to my superintendent and say, hey, I'm going to apply for this sabbatical or what have you. And that gave you credibility and whatnot for your institution. And I know some of the recipients we had. I don't want to be too presumptuous, but I'd suggest to you that to position their career, their department, survive because they were involved with AMTEC, Common Relations, conferences, and that kind of stuff. I know one of the reasons I survived is I go to a conference, gather every new piece of equipment or idea that I could, go back to my people and say, hey, look what's coming, look what's coming. And my poor late superintendent was a total Luddite, but he was getting positive feedback, so I'll go ahead and do it. Got no money, but go ahead and do it. Shut up, Al. What else would you like to know?
So you were a Commonwealth Relations Trust Bursar?
No, he was only for post-secondary at the time.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to think of some of the names I know. I should look through it.
Well,
I don't know yet. You must have that someplace. There's a list somewhere.
yeah, I was one way back in '93. So I was very, very fortunate and appreciate that. I guess, I don't know, maybe this is a question for Cindy, but we were talking about the AMTEC relationships outside Canada, and I think Cindy, especially with AECT.
That's the American one, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it was huge. They had their own issues. I went to something in Detroit, I think, one year. I don't recall, except I got the feeling that we might have had 200 members and they had 2,000. But they ran into the exact same dynamics we did. They had funding issues, credibility issues. Computers came along, tried to swallow them, sort of thing. You know. We ran the same elephant in the mouse scenario.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that Robin works with a group of geophysical geography profs. We administered a conference in Niagara Falls a few years ago. Community organizations for Canadian, 3-quarter American, smaller branches. So, of course, I sat at the registration desk. I heard the same dynamics of trying to do a conference, trying to get your field recognized, as we did with AMTEC. I'll suggest to you that the people that worked in post-secondary saw, some of them anyway, saw what was happening in K-12 beyond 16 mil film. Saw people like myself, Dave Beeman, Don Bates, and whatnot. Their kids were going home to them and say, hey, guess what we did at school today? I had my own kids at the time. I had 4 in elementary. That was sort of behind the door feedback. Eventually, we'd get back to secondary. I used to finally get high school principals were skeptical. Till finally one year when high school was being renovated, principal came to me and said, we have a theater arts program. We want to do some technology. What do you think? I said, Bob, what's my budget? He says, 50, 60 grand enough. Well, you want to see a gymnatorium with a full-blown stage with lighting, audio, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, some teachers started using it. Well, the other high schools thought they should have it too. So that's kind of influence is not unusual. Same thing happened there. But we were city police department, not videotape. As security cameras came along, they could tape. They had no way to slow mo. They'd bring them to the school districts, resource centers. I know in Guelph, London, because I had contacted the police department there. That's what they did. But that only came about because I learned about that kind of stuff through my contacts in AMTEC. And there's a whole bunch of other people that did a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm trying to think of Lillian Careford, Mary Ann Epp in Glencore College. That's where Bruce was.
Yeah.
So I think although we were small, we were mighty. And I like to think the technology was driven by demand by the kids or your students. But we started asking elementary teachers to make it more flexible. Enlightened principals decided that, I can afford a few kids.
Cindy? Oh.
So somebody else.
I was just going to say, we're losing your voice a little bit when you turn your head, I
Sorry.
think. That's okay. Well, I don't know that I want to ask another question. Every question that I had in mind has been answered, and it's wonderful that you're telling us. In fact, Al, you're filling in some holes in my understanding and knowledge about the history of AMTEC and about the people. And we're going to want to be in touch with you later to see if you can maybe identify a few other people we could interview, because you've mentioned some names that we haven't heard before in our other interviews. So if that's okay with you, we'll certainly follow up that way.
What are you really lacking? Like what's 1, 2, 3 besides the quilt? I've heard so much about the darn quilt.
So you don't have anything to offer about the quilt then?
You know what? I talked to Ross not long ago, and I said, you know, it might have been in media news. There's a photograph, and I don't know if the late Jeanette Gallan's in it or Donna from BEI. There's a picture of the quilt with 3 or 4 ladies, and it was printed in a publication. There might be something there. Ross told me that Mary didn't know anything.
Yeah.
No, and in fact, that's useful because I don't remember seeing ever a photograph with anybody in the quilt, like with the quilt as a human person. We only have the photograph of the quilt. And so, yes, it's none of us are going to rest until we figure out where the quilt came from.
I think, unfortunately, Jeff would have had a good memory for that.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things I don't really know who's around, because it wasn't many years after my life changed for a number of reasons, and I moved out here 12 years ago.
Yeah.
I now have 3 kids instead of 4, and they're all grown up. They're all doing very well. And when I moved out here a dozen years ago, it was finally retired time. These medical issues popped up about 2.5. And it's very frustrating for a guy that used to swim 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Can't swim anymore, but otherwise I'm doing great. When I saw this come through across my screen, if you wish, I was keen to participate, even though I talked too much. Because of my experience during the time, it was people like June Landsberg, who was in charge of media in Ottawa, who would drag people like me in and say, you gotta come and see this, you gotta come and help us. And then we ended up helping each other, and that's why Bob Burnett, faculty of ed at Nipissing, you're a teacher, come and teach my teachers what this learning resources are about.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And then, as you know by now, they come along, Athabasca, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to think that the early pioneers, somewhere in the files in Ottawa, and I know this for a fact, there is some documentation about NAVA and GAVA, the National Audiovisual Association and the Canadian Audiovisual Association.
Yes.
They were the precursors to AMTEC.
We should send you a copy of our article because that speaks to all of those. We were lucky enough to be able to dig out sort of that series set of threads, but you know, it's always open for improvement for sure.
Well, and in fact, we raised some questions, and we know we've made some errors of assumption, perhaps, in that article. So we do make an appeal at the end for anybody who's got anything else to say or corrections to make. So if you could read it, that would be lovely.
Let me ask you this question, if I may. What is the last year you have an official AMTEC membership list? Like just AMTEC.
2006, is that right?
Well,
because
I got
the merger with CADE was 2007.
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to suggest, because I'm such a grumpy old guy, well, I could use 2021. Now, I'm not sure about all of them, but I'm looking down at my list. Marie Barron's still working at it, sort of thing. And some of these some of these other people's names. Marianne Epp, I think, is still with us. I could flip through the membership. John Godfreyson's still around. He's got a good memory.
Do you have
etc.
contact information for these folks as well, Alan?
I'm looking at 2021.
But like, do
The
you have
thing is-
emails or phone numbers?
Phone. Yeah, there's emails on some.
Okay.
Rich Weir still in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
Retired here.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I tried to find Marianne Epp, and I could not find anything. And Keys Hoff, another fellow from Langara.
Keith was hard to find at the best of times.
Yeah.
There's Cindy Ives, Diane James are on the same page.
Alphabetical.
Can't imagine how that happened.
Yeah.
I know Carlson's around. He's become an author.
Yeah, we actually got to talk with Gary. We got to talk with Rick Schweer. Yeah, we've done what, about a dozen interviews so far, I think.
Yeah.
My memory serves. Yeah.
Did you get leaked out of some of those people?
But yeah, we'd absolutely love to follow up with you and get a copy of that list, and maybe even have you curate it. Let us know which folks we should zero in on that have like AMTEC experience versus just media experience. Yeah.
Okay. This is one.
Perfect.
I'm from the mid-90s. I think I've got 91, 92, 93 directory handbook things. I don't need this.
Yeah. Sorry, we're
Do
missing.
you have any of the handbooks?
Any of the handbooks.
These-
Chris,
There are
you know
some
that.
in the archives.
Some are in the archives. I have one here, I think somewhere, the membership list from, I can't remember what year it is. So
that'd be my only source right now. Or you talk to people like Gary, or although you get at 12, or Al Lehman. I've got nobody back east left, I don't think. Oh, Maureen's in Montreal. She's still there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we've talked to Maureen. Yeah.
I'm not sure at this age I'd hate to put you on to somebody and find out they passed away, sort of thing,
Yeah. And that was the other reason why when Chris and Cindy and I started talking about this, it was one of the things that we really wanted to do. And you mentioned about, how you talk a lot. Historians love people who talk a lot. I mean, we've got to, that's one of the joys of being able to do this, because we have lost some of our colleagues. We never got a chance to talk to, and so everything that they would know is gone. So we tried really hard to identify, where possible, all the folks that we really wanted to catch, in terms of their willingness to tell their stories.
So your efforts will end up in the archives in Ottawa, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris and Russ, I think, have been doing so. Ray, I'm not sure. Who have you been working with?
I've been working with Ross around materials, including the quilt, and we found the old gavel, and we found some other stuff that was used in the board meetings and such. And the videos that we're doing now, they're on the CNIE website under the AMTEC History Project. So we're trying to keep, have the memory keepers and their oral history of AMTEC and their experiences in AMTEC and all these things around the role of AMTEC in education.
I'm not that good at following up, but what I will try and do is take the 21 membership list and the 93 handbook, and I'll try and pick out 8, 10, 12, 20 people that I think, if they're still around, would be of some to you.
Yeah.
That would be
That would be-
really helpful. And at the
Perfect.
same time, we can send you the link to the other videos. If you haven't had a chance to look at them, you can see who we've already talked to.
I watched Mary's and somebody
Oh,
else's.
you did. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll also
I-
send you a copy of the article as well, just so you
Yeah.
have a chance to have a
Yeah,
look at
sure.
it. Yeah.
And
So
just
don't-
anything.
Yeah, no, please finish. Sorry.
No, well, this I'm new to this tracheotomy thing back in May after 2 years dealing with vocal cord issues. And my vocal cord said as they were done. So unfortunately, I spent 32 days in the hospital, and they tell you for every day there, you need a week to recover, which for me is the end of November. I'm almost there.
Excellent.
I'm doing good, but by this time of the day, I'm starting to fade.
Yeah.
No, I don't mind doing this. It was a love of my life to do this kind of work. It was very
Oh.
good. And I think the most important thing I got out of it, well, if you worked out of Sudbury, Cindy was in Sudbury.
Yes.
You know what it's like if you live in Northern Ontario. The north starts in Parry Sound, so nobody knows you're there. I have a daughter that lives in Kapuskasing,
Oh, my gosh.
so I'm still 8. They're doing superbly well. Even her husband is a very, very, very good job in that city. They couldn't afford to live in Toronto. They love it anyway. Doesn't matter. No, I'm very grateful for the colleagues I've made, the friends I've made, and as you can hear, some of them have been lifelong, and we still bark at each other occasionally. I miss Bruce McLean a lot. He was one of my best, I think. And Robin and I made efforts to go visit him. And I still call Sally every few months. All of that is totally as a result of AMTEC. Last story. Conference in London about, I don't know, 79, 80, 81. All those college faculty of ed. I forget what the topic was, doesn't matter. Brax, that's to say. At the end of that meeting, you could smoke in the room. This tall fellow with a beard and glasses come over, tapped me in the shoulder, and he says, "Hey, young fella, can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure. Where are you?" He says, "My name is Bruce McLean, kid. I need to talk to you." Till the day Bruce passed, he kept calling me kid. And that was AMTEC. So there's a good AMTEC story for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anyway, okay.
So Cindy, you're muted. I'm sorry.
What?
I don't know how that happened. It's the friendships that others have have mentioned. It's the contacts. It's for some of us who've worked across the country, it's the ability to move across the country and to take the experience of one place to another, from one level of education to another. And AMTEC was, sort of central.
Yeah, it was pivotal.
Kind of a hub for all those spokes, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where would you like to send me what I'm going to dig out?
Well, why don't we formally end the interview, and then I can turn off the recording, and then we can deal with those details if that's all right. So I just want to say thank you so much. You have no idea, as a young graduate student, how many times I heard Mary Kennedy talk about Allen LeBlanc. So I just want you to know that even though we probably haven't met very often, you were a big part of my my graduate studies because your name was constantly mentioned.
It was a contest between Mary and I who could talk the most.
I am not going to suggest either of you win. I think you were very, very close together in that respect. It was always fun.
She's
So-
wonderful.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to hear your stories and to talk to you today. And I don't know if Cindy or Chris wanted to say anything before we end.
Just to echo your thanks, Diane. Al, it's just fantastic to hear some of your stories and to have some of our gaps filled. And thank you for taking the time with us.
You're welcome. Sorry I couldn't do it earlier because of
That's all right.
No.
Yeah.
I'm going to
When the-
turn off the recording now.